Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dead Times, the only horror movie podcast recorded in a space station of the Earth. I'm your host, Peter, and with me, as always, is the guy whose arm is in a box, Tim. Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad that you've got that arm situation under control.
You know, it doesn't even hurt. My arm helped us find the Earth. Best line of the year already.
Tonight we are going to finish out our visit to Cloverfield with the Cloverfield Paradox.
Here we go.
It is
Dum, da-dum, da-dum.
a bit of a fascinating movie because...
In many respects.
Yeah, because, well, this movie was supposed to come out in March or possibly April, and then all of a sudden during the Super Bowl, everyone was treated to the trailer for it, announcing that it would be released on Netflix literally right after the Super Bowl was over. I think that there's some fairly obvious reasons why they decided to make it a Netflix movie as opposed to...
because just in every way, shape, or form, it is a Netflix movie.
Oh, it's absolutely a Netflix movie. What's astonishing to me is, with both Cloverfield and 10 Cloverfield Lane, we talked about the budget, because they are doing a lot with a very, very small budget. This movie, not so small a budget. It had a budget of $45 million. Paramount allegedly sold the movie to Netflix for $50 million.
And what, Peter, I ask you, did they do with that money?
That I am not entirely certain, because I don't think there's noticeably better or more special effects than there were in the previous two movies. Like, just a few exterior shots of a spaceship, or space station. Like, there really weren't any monsters or anything going on in this movie.
Not for the most part, not visibly.
The monsters are human greed.
Was that the point? Was that what this movie was saying?
Maybe. We talked a lot about how the first two movies dealt with sort of different aspects of 9/11. This movie, not so much.
I think you could kind of argue that it does. You know, it's certainly got some current day political stuff on its brain. You know, it's about the difficulties of getting lots of different countries to come together for a common good. But it's not exactly a deep film in the way that I would say the other two were at least trying to be.
Yeah, the premise of this movie is that the Earth has run out of energy, which makes kind of zero sense because the sun is still there. The sun's in the sky, there's still wind and tides, and the Earth still has molten lava underneath it. Presumably, there's still fissionable material. So I don't know why literally the entire world seems to be collapsing due to a lack of energy. Did this world never have windmills in Holland?
I mean, I don't know what world this takes place in, so maybe...
There are multiple worlds in this movie.
A good point.
So, I mean, we could do all sorts of fun speculation about how they got to a point where there's just like, there's no energy left on the planet, even though, again, there's so many sources of energy, it's just that they aren't oil.
And this is going to end up like one of those video essays about Bright. About Bright's world building and lack thereof.
But yeah, apparently Russia is threatening to invade someone. It's not exactly clear who they're going to invade.
Yeah, the world is like on the brink of World War I, but again, because of oil.
Yeah, which makes you sort of think back to Mad Max Fury Road, or in fact the entire...
I often think back to Mad Max Fury Road.
I think that your entire life is trying to live like Mad Max Fury Road, and you are deeply upset about the fact that you can't paint yourself white and then spray paint silver paint on top of your white paint.
I mean, that's just the American dream.
But yeah, I mean...
The Australian dream, I guess.
It does put you back into sort of the Mad Max idea of what a world without much oil would be like, but it doesn't pull it off anywhere near as well.
Yeah, and to be fair, I did question watching Fury Road how it was that in this post-apocalyptic world where there are fewer resources, Furiosa has this cybernetic arm that appears to be a slight advancement on the technology that existed before the shit hit the fan. This movie takes that kind of inconsistency and runs with it.
Yeah.
So we're out of oil, but we have enough resources to build a giant space reactor.
And what our characters are attempting to do is do some sort of advanced physics thing involving the Higgs boson particle to make energy.
They smashed the Higgs boson.
It's never literally throughout the entire movie, it's never exactly clear how any of this actually happens, but they do something with the reactor and then energy gets made. And then they can all go on.
It is remarkable that it is never clear exactly what is going on, because throughout most of the movie, people are very earnestly explaining it to us.
I mean, this is a very, very messy movie. There's a lot of stuff that's sort of just happening that you probably shouldn't think too deeply about why it could possibly be happening.
Don't think about it.
And like even the most striking and cool thing that happens in this movie makes a great degree of sense. It's just the other stuff that goes around it that's sort of similar but is nowhere near as interesting. Just sort of random stuff happens. I mean, you just have to roll with the fact that random stuff is happening.
Essentially, yeah. And me and you were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. I'm probably gonna come out of this defending this movie a little bit because it is getting panned by pretty much everybody and their mom.
Did you watch it with your mom?
No, my mom would actually probably like this movie. But this is, I mean, here's the thing. This is one of the most unapologetically and kind of gloriously pulpy things that I have seen in a long time in a moving picture. Like I just recently started, for any of our listeners who are fans, I just started reading Black Science, which I hadn't read before. This movie is kind of a lot like Black Science. It's just kind of a parade of ridiculous pseudoscientific shit being thrown at you. And it's not very deep or compelling, but it's also very not boring. I found this movie really entertaining, and I think that I found it entertaining in the way that it was supposed to be, because I think that this movie was kind of meant to be a troll move to the audience. And not, again, when you write a movie which contains the line, "My arm helped us find the Earth," you can't be making a bid to be taken all that seriously. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's not the sort of the annoying sort of self-conscious brainlessness of something like Transformers, mm-hmm. That is just sort of cloying to me. So I think, I'm not gonna sit here and say this movie was a masterpiece, but I think it did sort of accomplish roughly what it set out to accomplish, and that is not something that everybody is going to be interested in, and it is not something that if people are bothered that this movie showed up within this franchise when they've come to expect something else, maybe not because both of the two previous movies in this franchise were very different from each other, obviously, mm-hmm. but you could still be a fan of this franchise and reasonably expect to not get a movie like this from it, and I would absolutely empathize with that. But I was mostly along for the ride, and I'm gonna have fun picking it apart with you, I'm sure. But I think that is part of the fun that was meant to be had with this movie.
I think that there's some like really good ideas. I don't think that there's any version of the script that probably well executed any of those ideas. And this was a script that was rewritten a bunch of times, but so was 10 Cloverfield Lane, and that movie was amazing.
Yeah, this is not as good in an objective sense of a movie as either of the previous two.
Yeah, and it definitely suffers from the fact that no one is anywhere near the caliber of an actor as John Goodman.
No, but then again, neither was anybody in the first movie. The first movie is a more consistent movie, and it is more thematically ambitious, and it's more riveting in the traditional sense. But I might even say that this is a more entertaining movie than the first movie. It's not a better movie by any proper sense of the word, and it's not as entertaining or anywhere near as good as the second movie. That's certainly the case. But yeah, I don't quite have the same vitriol for this movie that a lot of the internet seems to have already.
Well, this movie fits into a sort of subgenre of horror that basically consists of scientists investigating the unknown in their own hubris and discovering that the universe is a much more horrifying, terrible place than they could ever possibly imagine. Like Event Horizon, like Sphere, and like early on last year there was the movie Life.
That's what I was thinking of watching this. Yeah, this movie is Event Horizon. I was joking about from some of the promotional stuff that I'd seen, or just some of the reception that I'd seen in our episode about 10 Cloverfield Lane. I was jokingly comparing it to Independence Day. I wasn't far off, but that was the wrong touchstone. The right touchstone isn't Independence Day, it's Event Horizon.
Yeah,
with a little bit of Planet of the Apes.
This is definitely taking many ideas of Event Horizon and running with them. There are a bunch of scientists who are living in a space station above the Earth with a giant particle accelerator, doing something that's sort of like smash Higgs boson, step 1, ? Step 2, step 3, energy. Back on Earth, this is incredibly controversial, as Donald Logue shows up as a conspiracy theorist who has the same last name as John Goodman's character from 10 Cloverfield Lane. So I'm assuming that probably they're not brothers, but they're interdimensional relatives in some way.
Whatever that means.
But yeah, he claims that what they're doing on the Cloverfield space station, because it is of course named the Cloverfield space station, will cause cracks in space and time, allowing monsters and demons to basically pour into not just their universe, but every universe.
Yeah, he says that the movie Event Horizon will happen.
Yeah, basically.
Which it does.
And at that point I was thinking that that was kind of an interesting idea, that it would thematically tie all these movies together, that they're depicting basically fractured space-time where things that are not supposed to be there are there. And so you don't really need to have like an explanation for the aliens that showed up in 10 Cloverfield Lane or the monster in the original Cloverfield. And you could even in fact do origin stories for them, but that they're all tied together in this idea that across many dimensions, space and time have fractured and are allowing unknowable things to cross over from one universe to another. But everyone in the space station is pretty unconcerned with the idea that they might accidentally fracture multiple dimensions.
Got the hubris. It's always the hubris.
This is an entire space station populated by Helens from Candyman.
Kind of, yeah.
I would not be surprised if those people at night would just go in their bathrooms and say Candyman 5 times in the mirror while they're in the middle of this whole scientific experiment.
I mean, if that was a scene in this movie, it wouldn't have been more out of place with the flow of the movie than several other things actually in the movie.
They've been for 2 years attempting to test this particle accelerator called the Shepherd,
or whatever it is.
But they keep failing, and they allegedly have only 3 more tries. They only have enough fuel for 3 more tries, which doesn't make sense because of the fact that they have solar panels on the space station. So why is the space station just going to be permanently in eclipse behind the Earth at that point? Who knows?
And that's when this movie really started to fall apart.
Yeah, but they try it once again, and it somehow manages to achieve making power. And they're all very, very excited and jumping for joy, and then it overloads and everything explodes. And when they restore power to the space station, Earth is gone. They're just alone in space. However, the sun is still there, which I actually think is kind of an interesting setup, because there would be...
It's not the most original, but you could have made a less goofy movie with that premise.
Because again, they don't know, like we find out later on that the sun is still there, although they keep that hidden for a bit, but all of their navigational, not even navigational equipment, all of their star maps, I guess would be the best way to put it, aside this one computer called the gyroscope, and that goes missing, so they seemingly have no one that knows astronomy, so they don't know where they are. Why does the space station have no one that can look at the stars around them and tell them where they are?
Yeah, because spoiler alert, when they find it later on and they plug it back in, it just like highlights a constellation, like, oh, that's Sagittarius or whatever it is. Like, how could you not see that before?
Yeah, like it would seem like one of the most important things that you would want on a space station is someone who's an astronomer. Like they speculate that they might have been thrown into the other side of the galaxy or into a different galaxy, and it turns out that they're really just on the other side of the sun and upside down. Like how do they not have the ability to look at the sky outside of their windows and realize, oh, we're on the other side of the sun and upside down at this point?
I don't know.
But we have a very multinational crew, each representing a different country. You have Hamilton.
If the countries are like, if all of those countries, as we find out later, are like on the brink of killing each other, like how did they come together on this agreement, like 2 years ago to make this collaborative space program, which we don't even do that now. Like with international relations as we have them now, everybody's like, no way, we're not going into space with those people. So, but if we were on the brink of World War III, then we could work it out somehow.
Our main character is Hamilton, played by Gugu Mbatha-Raw, who is probably most famous for being in the episode of Black Mirror San Junipero, which won the Emmy for Best Miniseries or Movie last year. I think that she does a fine job. She isn't as good as she is in Black Mirror. In this,
she's a decent lead.
Yeah.
None of the acting in this movie is particularly terrible. They're committed to the material, perhaps more than they should be.
I mean, and more than anything else, this movie feels like, other than possibly Event Horizon, this movie feels like an episode of Black Mirror that just goes on for a little bit longer than it normally would.
And I haven't seen Black Mirror.
Black Mirror is really, really good, but you have to accept the fact that it's an anthology show, and there will be episodes of varying qualities.
Just like you have to accept that with an anthology movie series.
Then there is Keel, who is the American captain of the space station. There is Schmidt, who is the German science officer.
German/London. I don't know what accent that was.
There is Monka Costa, who is the Brazilian medic, ship doctor. And Chris O'Dowd.
And is the resident religious person whose name is Monk.
Yeah, I thought for a really...
Just in case you weren't clear.
Like, I could not figure out if that was supposed to be a nickname, because I couldn't...
That's what I thought at first, too. I was like, there's no way that the one Christian on the ship is literally named Monk.
And then famous Irish comedic actor Chris O'Dowd.
Yeah, that's who that was. I knew that I recognized him. He's got a beard that makes him look kind of like Judd Apatow. And so, like, at first I was like, no, it can't be. Like, it wouldn't be him. Why are you thinking that, Tim? But
yeah, he plays Mundy, who does something with worms that are on the ship.
Space worms, just like fucking Howard said in the last movie. He was right. There are space worms. Best reveal in the movie. When I saw those on the ship, I was like, holy shit, he was right.
Then there is the Russian navigator or something, or possibly janitor. We don't even... Volkov. He's from Russia. And then there is the other science engineer, Tam, who is from China. And I got unreasonably annoyed at her as a character because she's from China and she only speaks Chinese. And all the other characters speak Chinese to her, which I'm assuming is entirely because of the fact that they thought this would be a big budget blockbuster that would get a huge theatrical release. And therefore, they were trying to appeal to the Chinese box office.
That makes a lot of sense. I wasn't mad at her. She's a real kind of nothing of a character. You know, none of the characters are like deeply characterized, but the other ones have at least somewhat distinctive personalities. She's just kind of there.
Yeah, she is played by Zhang Jiai, who was in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, House of the Flying Daggers. So she is like a legitimate, amazing actress. But like the Chinese box office, the Chinese government will only allow 33 foreign language films to show in China per year. And one of the ways to get around that is to have a very prominent Chinese actress in your film. And yeah, it just seemed like such a complete... Like, because again, this character... She doesn't really have anything of a personality, and there are at least 3 other non-native English speakers in the group of scientists, all of whom
speak English.
Yeah, it's literally just her, and then everyone speaks Chinese to her, which seems like, yeah, it seems absolutely like trying to toady to the Chinese box office.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Which is, in this case, it's way less annoying than, like, for example, when Red Dawn switched their entire antagonist from China to North Korea, or when, what was it, the movie 2012, where they talk about how wonderful Chinese spaceships are. Like, it's not as bad as that, but it's still something that I find incredibly annoying.
Yeah, it's just lame, you know, and it's transparent in a way that's lame.
Yeah, and none of these characters are really, with the exception of Hamilton, none of them are developed in any particular way. They're basically just functionaries. Chris O'Dowd gets some jokes that he makes occasionally, but yeah, it's definitely, they went in the exact opposite direction from 10 Cloverfield Lane, where it was so character-based.
Yeah, although not as far as the first movie did, where just I cannot remember the name of a character in that movie, and the only personality I can sort of remember was T.J. Miller's character, and I remember that he made T.J. Millery jokes, and that's it. Whereas I felt like, again, none of these characters are compelling at all, and certainly not as compelling as all 3 characters in 10 Cloverfield Lane, but I thought they were, you know, at least somewhat entertaining to watch on screen, and they had kind of distinctive personalities, and some of the ways that they worked off each other would be kind of fun. But they are sort of a poor man's Guardians of the Galaxy.
But they're stuck, and they don't know where Earth is. They lost their gyroscope, and they're just focused on getting repairs to the ship.
Yeah, and they fret about making repairs for an hour and 20 minutes of this movie. Like, that's what a lot of this movie is just them shouting at each other about what their priorities should be.
But as they're repairing things, strange things start happening. They notice that the worms have vanished, and they hear screaming coming from inside the walls, which is pure Event Horizon. And they open up one of the walls and find that there is a woman none of them have ever met before in the wall, basically like fused inside of a bunch of their wiring. And so they have to literally cut her out of the wall. wall.
Yeah, and then, like, yeah, they're looking at her like, oh shit, all the stuff has gone through her, but it turns out that she's fine. And they're also like, no, we can't, like, turn any of this off or cut the wires, it'll, like, turn off important stuff. And it turns out that that's also fine. So there was a multifaceted panic that turned out to be completely unfounded.
But I will say that the screaming in the walls and then finding Jensen inside the wall is probably the best sequence in the movie.
Probably, yeah, that's the things I was gonna say at the outset. This movie, even more so than some of the other movies we've covered, really doesn't seem like we should be talking about it on this podcast because it's not a horror movie. It is a pure sci-fi movie that has some kind of icky stuff in it sometimes. But when it does get icky, it doesn't really neuter it. You know, so that stuff is legitimately a little bit disturbing. There's some other stuff that's a little off-putting. So I give it props for that it doesn't feel like it was edited for television. If anything, it feels like it was made for this really does feel like I think Brad Jones said this in his this feels like an hour and a half pilot for a sci-fi series.
No, I could completely see that. The thing is that sci-fi and horror are very closely intertwined, some of it in ways even closer than horror and fantasy, and certainly closer than science fiction and fantasy. Even in, like, Star Trek, you'll have sort of these dark, twisted dystopian episodes that are drawing primarily from horror, because a huge part of horror is confronting the unknown, and the main difference between what we traditionally think about science fiction and what we traditionally think about horror or horror-flavored science fiction is the unknown basically an abomination? Like, is it unknowable? Is it impossible to communicate with? And is it trying to kill us? Like,
yeah, this movie takes the rare stance that the way that it plays out, that it's totally fine to meddle with forces that are way bigger than you. Everything works out pretty much great, except for like these three random, these 3 or 4 random astronauts ended up dying, but it all ends up working out pretty fine. Even though it is, because the larger forces in science fiction, either turn out, are either grandly benevolent in Arrival or Contact or something, or they're, again, symbols of man's hubris and the things that are not meant to be messed with. It's the Frankenstein thing. And here, like, it's not some grand benevolent thing. It is just these natural forces that they do fuck up a lot of shit by messing with. But the way that the movie lands is like, no, it's totally fine. Like, we'll get it under control. Like, it'll seem bad for a while, but we'll be able to figure it out.
Yeah, once you fix that misplaced decimal point in the equation, everything's gonna be fine.
Exactly. That's what happens in this fucking movie. Like, at first they're like, oh no, by doing this thing we, like, send ourselves to another dimension, and as it turns out, they don't know this, but we unleashed monsters upon the Earth. But then they're like, okay, and we fixed it, and it's fine now, and we achieved exactly what we set out to do. Earth has an infinite source of free energy at the end of this horror movie.
Yep. But yeah, they take the woman out of the wall, and Volkov is acting more erratic, and they use 3D printers in this movie to make their food, among other things.
Yeah, and there's that was a detail that I liked, is on that machine, written on, like, masking tape and Sharpie, print is stuck onto the side, his world's worst bagel machine.
Yeah, they use it to make their food, but Volkov makes a gun, and he uses it to menace the crew, except for the fact that his body explodes because all the worms somehow teleported from their enclosure into his body.
Yeah, and that turns out to be it. Like, he eventually just dies because of that. And then they cut him open, and later they find out that's what it was. But he had, like, this whole scene he has this whole, like, it's like that sequence from Poltergeist, where he's looking in the mirror, like, messing with his face, and, like, it's going all weird, like, his eye gets out of whack, it, like, crosses by itself, and he fixes it, and then, like, he has, like, this conversation with himself, and, like, I was like, is this Event Horizon? Is he possessed or something? Is there, like, what is going on? It turned out he just was full of worms.
Yep.
What? What was all that other shit about, movie? I thought you were going somewhere with that. I said that often throughout this movie. I thought you were going somewhere with that.
No, it was literally that the worms teleported into his body. And how does he not notice the fact that the worms teleported?
Yeah, I feel like I would know. There were a decent quantity of live worms that were suddenly inside my body. In my head! And it turns out they're navigational device. He had a hunk of metal the size of a coffee can, full of like circuitry and shit, like heavy, expensive shit, just in the bottom of his torso, and he was fine. He was still just walking around, wasn't.
And speaking of which, how do they have only one of those on the space station? That seems like something you'd want a backup of.
Yeah, and also, why was it only like those two things that when they made the dimensional shift just randomly teleported, not just around the ship, but all just within inside the body of this one guy? Like, there wasn't a whole bunch of other shit that was misplaced. It was just the worms and that one specific thing they really needed both ended up in the torso of this one guy. Base rules.
Yeah, there are moments in this movie where it feels like it was leading up to that there was some kind of intentionality, some kind of sentience behind the just random shit that's happening, but then it just turns out to be completely random.
It never does. It never does. That's the thing. That's like I was waiting for like the third act reveals, like, and this is how the worms ending up in this guy and the water showing up out of nowhere. I think that actually was explained, but yeah, and this guy's hand getting sucked into. I was waiting for there to be a reveal, like, and this is what it all meant. This is the machinations that were going on some higher level that were causing this all to happen. But no, it was just random shit. This is a movie of random shit.
Yeah, random stuff happens for an hour and a half, and then everyone goes home. Everyone who's still alive.
I'm both looking forward to and not looking forward to, because there's so much to choose from, our final segment, because there are several pretty incredible deaths in this movie.
Yeah, but so while Mundy is repairing things, his arm gets sucked into the wall, and then he has to fight with the wall for his arm for a little while until it just becomes severed, and it's not even bleeding, it's just severed. Like, you can see the bone and everything.
Stops. There's like, but there's no skin over it. It's just like it's like a cross-section look at his arm. It's just there. It just stops. It's like he has it up against glass, and it's just not bleeding. Yeah, and then the examiner's like, it's like he never had the arm in the first place. And that's, again, that never comes back. We never get an explanation.
Well, like, the weird thing is that the arm itself shows up later on, and it's just wandering. It is just wandering around the space station, crawling around, and they put it into a glass box, but it seems to want to write something. So they give his arm a pen and a piece of paper, and it tells him to look inside Volkov's body, which is where they find the gyroscope.
How did it know that? How does it know things? It's an arm. And aside from not having a central nervous system, how did it know that thing specifically?
Which, that's not something that Mundy knew. Where's it getting its information from?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Wherever these brain signals are coming from, it's not from him. He's not in control of his arm. But the arm not only is privy to information, but feels motivated to give them this information for some reason. What? What is this plot point?
Which, and the thing is that the arm is just there. And, like, they occasionally will go into the room and, like, be doing stuff in the room that the arm is in, and it will be lying there in the glass box.
Yeah, sometimes this movie, it's kind of the mascot of the movie.
Like, there's a final
sequence of events that happens in this movie.
Like, the final confrontation that takes place in this movie takes place in the room with the arm, and, like, they cut to the arm in it, and, like, I was waiting for that to be, like, the arm attacks her, or...
No, it does nothing!
It does nothing. The arm has no purpose in this movie beyond after.
Yeah, it helps them find the Earth. That is a line of dialogue that Mundy says because they then cut open Volkov. That was his name, right?
Yeah.
And they find the navigational thing, stick it back in, and then that lets them reorient themselves, which we went over the absurdity of that. And then Mundy stands there and says, "My arm helped us find the Earth."
Oh my God, why? But yeah, no.
Because awesomeness. That is why, Peter. This movie is amazing.
It feels like that the arm should have come back at some point in the third act, but it just doesn't. But yeah,
nothing recurs in this movie.
They use the gyroscope to figure out that they are on the other side of the sun from where the Earth is supposed to be, and that they're upside down, and they can't transmit information, but they can receive it for some reason. And they discover that they are not in the same universe they were in before. It is a different universe where that is a much more darker universe, is a much more violent universe, and where their version of the Cloverfield station has already crashed into the Earth. There has been massive wars going on, and eventually the woman wakes up and her name is Jensen, and she tells them about her reaction to them is that she knows all of them, but just from the alternate versions of themselves. And that Hamilton, our main character, was just a civilian coordinator at the station as opposed to being an actual crew member. Now, I enjoyed Jensen as a presence in this movie.
Yeah, aside from our lead, maybe even more so than our lead, she's probably the most legitimately compelling character.
Yeah.
Which isn't saying a whole lot, but...
She's played by Elizabeth Debicki, and is just sort of not as well-rounded as Howard was in 10 Cloverfield Lane. She's sort of a similar type of character in the fact that you don't really know how you should feel about her, and that something about her seems off throughout the entire movie, that she's colder than she should be, and just interacts with people in a really, really weird way.
She's the, what's his name? Oh, I'm failing as a movie buff. The android from Alien. That shit, this is stupid. Ash. Yeah, she's the Ash of this movie. That was not worth the effort that it took to make that reference.
But yeah, she reveals that Schmidt is actually sabotaging the Cloverfield station, that the reason why they failed so many different times is because of the fact that he was under orders from the German government that they were not to succeed prior to Russia's complete collapse. I believe it's implied that Germany is supposed to invade Russia, although that seems like a terrible decision on Germany's part.
It usually is. Invading Russia is always a bad idea.
I don't know if that's worked out for anyone other than the Mongols.
Well, even then, that didn't really last, but yeah, that was how Napoleon and Hitler were both taken down.
And that was how the Habsburgs and Bismarck were taken down in World War I, is that this whole idea of invading Russia tends to go badly. And World War I was the best example of succeeding at the invasion of Russia. So they checked Schmidt's communication, and it turns out that he was having secret communications with Germany's government during this whole thing. And so they lock him in an airlock. Tam eventually figures out that the problem that they've been trying to solve for literally 2 years at this point is the fact that they never bothered trying to run this experiment in a vacuum, and water moisture was fucking their shit up.
Yeah, these are our scientific genius heroes, ladies and gentlemen. Our best and brightest.
I don't think... Is there air in a particle accelerator? I feel like that would defeat the purpose of a particle accelerator.
Yeah, because there would be lots of other particles comprising the air.
Maybe I'm just ignorant about particle accelerators.
I could be too. I don't know offhand, but
it feels like having air inside your particle accelerator is not going to work out well. I'm trying to look this up, but I have literally no idea what I'm even supposed to be looking for. How do particle accelerators work? This is going to be riveting on the podcast. Oh, well, I can't figure out if they're vacuums or not, but I feel like they have to be vacuums.
Yeah, if any nuclear physicists listen to our podcast, please correct us if we're being idiots.
Yeah, but it just seems like the idea that they spent 2 years and just figured out maybe we should not have water moisture around our electronic equipment.
Why did they do it in space if they weren't going to try that? Yeah, and again, they didn't figure this out in 2 years. Anyway, even if that isn't standard practice, surely it would have occurred to them. I guess they did it like it's not really said how often they try it, but they're up there for 2 years just testing it as often as they can until they start to run out of fuel. Surely one of those times somebody was like, hey, maybe we should vent out the water vapor. But no, that would be the easy way to do it.
But yeah, so Tam has now figured out how to make the whole thing work. And then, of course, since her purpose in this movie is over at that point, she has to die immediately. And she's just staying in a room that floods.
Was that explained? Was that a function of the ship that somehow went wrong? Because I thought that maybe this was another extra dimensional thing, that just water was just pouring in from another dimension, because I can't think of where it would come from. And she's just locked in there for some reason.
The only thing I could think of is that she did vent the water vapor, and somehow it wound up all in the room she was in.
Yes, but why did she go there? She's the ship's technician. How did she not know that was how that worked?
I have no idea. And then, immediately, as the room's flooding, it just suddenly breaks open, and the whole room freezes immediately.
Yes.
And she's just frozen inside the room looking at them. Oh God.
Yeah, this movie really likes to have it has ideas for set pieces that it wants to have, and then it just does them without actually making it make sense for those things to happen.
Yeah, because
It's just like, wouldn't it be cool if like she ended up trapped in this room and there was water pouring in, and then the window behind her broke open and all the water froze and she was frozen inside it. But it just has that happen just on the screen in front of you without actually making there be a logical train of events leading up to that happening. It's the fuck it school of screenwriting.
Which, meanwhile, Mundy has been wandering around the ship fixing things with his magnetic putty. I don't know how exactly it works, but it uses magnetism to adhere to things and electricity. It seems pretty useful, but he winds up in a room where he's been fixing a lot of stuff, and then there is suddenly a very, very strong magnetic field on the other side of the room pulling everything towards it.
Goes all Spider-Man 2 on us.
Yeah, and then the magnetic putty literally just reaches out to him, grabs him, and then envelops it into him.
What was with that shit? Why would surely it would just break off of that and just go to the other wall if it's no, it pulls him back like it's a fucking octopus monster.
Yeah, I'm like, that was
what?
Like at that point, I was like, there has to be something that is in control of this, because there's no way that just happened.
That was just the thing that happened.
So much random shit just happens in this movie. And then, of course, Mundy's death has literally no effect on his arm, which is still sitting in the room.
Drawing life force from somewhere. Also not bleeding.
Yep.
We didn't mention. This movie's amazing. Everybody should watch this. It should be shown in schools as a control unit, as an example of how to not learn things. Like, we're going to try and educate you while you're in this institution. Here's an example of the opposite of education. May we present the Cloverfield Paradox.
And then, while this is going on, they suddenly realize that one of their little habitation rings that is traveling in a circle in order to generate spin gravity is horribly misaligned and is going to destroy the entire station. And Hamilton, Keel, and Schmidt, who just sort of wanders out of the airlock he's been imprisoned with for a while and just tells everyone, oh, that's not me, that's from the other universe version of me.
Yeah, which, again, why does this other dimension is very, very picky and choosy with which aspects of it suddenly intrude upon the lives of our main characters. One random person from the other universe who's just there in the wall, and then also some emails that exist in this universe but didn't in the original one are there on the ship. And also Mundy loses his arm and gets killed by a magnetic.
Just random shit just happens. But yeah, no, like, and it literally is just like the airlock unlocks and he just walks out of it and he's just like, no, that was a different dimension. And then everyone's just like,
well, that was a freebie.
Yep. Which, again, it seems like if the airlock is unlocked, then someone had to have unlocked it, but no.
Yeah.
It's just...
Again, I thought that was going to be a reveal. I thought that it was going to be Event Horizon, and there was some kind of other dimensional monster that was linked to the other monsters back in Dimension on Earth 1. Yeah, that was prowling around the spaceship, like, killing people, and, stealing people's arms, and flooding rooms, and, doing all sorts of missions, and unlocking the place where he was being held. But no, that was just a thing that door just randomly unlocked.
Yep.
That is never explained. A door is unlocked in this movie that was locked to keep a prisoner in, and he wanders out, and it is never explained why that happened. What forces, natural or supernatural, opened that goddamn door? I ask you, J.J. Abrams, how did that happen?
Yeah, but so Schmidt and Hamilton and Keel go to basically disconnect this one ring that is going out of control, and it goes horribly wrong, and Keel has to sacrifice himself, and so that's yet another person that's dead, and they all go back, and Hamilton's just in charge.
Yeah, none of that sequence makes any sense either, incidentally. There's just, he has to sacrifice himself, cause, and she even says to him, she's like, no, there's this, we can do it remotely, and he just says, no, it has to be this way. Like, it doesn't explain, no, we couldn't do it that other way that you said. He just, no, I have. Just because it's the start of the third act and there has to be a noble sacrifice.
And, like, it is a giant design flaw in the space station that, like, you have to have this one door closed in order to manually disconnect the ring. It does not make any sense as a design choice, and I don't know why they didn't just destroy, like, this whole section of the space station is just being held on by, like, a couple of pipes. I don't know why they didn't just destroy the pipes.
The world's most advanced space station.
But yeah, so Keel sacrifices himself, and even though I don't think that there has been any chain of command command established in this movie at any point. Hamilton's just like, I'm in charge, and she's attempting to use Jensen to figure out all the stuff that Tam was supposed to do but died before she could. And then her plan is that Schmidt and Monk, because they're the only ones left alive, are going to travel back to the main universe, because if you run the experiment again, it will somehow undo everything.
Yeah, what the...
Like, they
It's
didn't
all speculative science, and I'm confident that that is not how this entirely fictional and speculative field of science would work. Turn it on again, and it'll take us home.
Yeah, like, they don't even do, like, the Star Trek thing of reversing polarity or something like that.
No, they're just run it again, and it'll take... How do you know that? How do you know it won't just keep taking you to different dimensions as long as you do this, like in Black fucking Science?
But, like, that's literally something that they just like, well, that's exactly what will happen. And no one questions it.
Draft 1 of the script. This was draft half of the script. This was draft .5 of this major blockbuster script.
But what we find out is that Hamilton had 2 children, and she was illegally stealing energy from the government in order to give them reading lights, and her shitty-ass electrical engineering job caused a fire which killed both of her children. How is she the person that is on the super advanced space station where they had the option of literally everyone on the planet, that she can't figure out how to make a good battery?
And she didn't even want to go. She got cajoled into it by her loving husband in the first scene of this movie, which the exposition in that scene is amazing. In that, we didn't really go over that first scene where they're just sitting in a random long line of traffic, which is also never explained because the attacks haven't started. Yeah, and she just, and she's like, "Why do you want me to go?" And he's I don't know. He's like, "Think about why." And she just, "Because if I don't, the planet will starve." Like, or something. It's something. It's the most like fucking like latter day and Night Shyamalan exposition crap. It's so clumsy.
Yeah, she has some dead kids. She finds out from Jensen that her children are alive in this alternate dimension. Even though everything else is shittier than it was in the main universe, her kids are alive. And so she's gonna go travel to Earth to be with her kids or something?
Yeah, or something, because the captain makes the very reasonable point that, like, they're not your kids, they're the version of you that exists on this planet's kids. Wouldn't that be way out of line to just show up and want to be these kids' other mom?
I mean, this universe already has a Hamilton in it. Like, unless she's planning on murdering that Hamilton and taking her place.
Which I could see happening in a Cloverfield movie. That could be the plot of one.
No, that 100% could happen in these movies.
Again, Black Science. Shit like this happens in Black Science.
There was one of Marvel Comics was a title called X-Man, not X-Men, X-Man, which starred a alternate universe version of Cable, who is the time-traveling son of Cyclops, and one of the supporting characters was Madeline Pryor, who was a clone of Jean Grey, who died, and then X-Man accidentally brought her back to life using psychic powers. It's very, very complicated. But it was revealed in one of the issues that at some point, another alternate universe version of Jean Grey had murdered Madeline Pryor and had simply taken her place throughout a whole bunch of these stories in order to enact her evil scheme.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I loved X-Man. It's so good. But yeah, so you had an alternate universe version of a character killing the clone of that character and then taking the clone's place. And I feel like that would be a good story to have in a Cloverfield movie.
Yeah. What are you implying that this wasn't a good story to have in a Cloverfield movie?
I think that there is the start of a good story to have in a Cloverfield movie, but I think that they got to a point where they were just like, well, why does any of this happen? They go, no reason, just random shit. And then someone was just like, well, okay, we've got a certain number of pages, how do we end this thing? And then another person goes, well, they just fire up the energy generator and go home.
Yeah, this movie has a 10-minute first act and no third act.
But yeah, so Jensen is able to fix everything on the ship because she's apparently much better than literally any of the other characters, and she doesn't die in the process of fixing it like all of them do.
Sure. That was more so than, like, really or what the fuck or anything. Like, what I said to myself most often watching this movie was, sure. Just over and over, just something would happen, I was, sure. Okay.
But yeah, Jensen, the plan was that Hamilton and Jensen would go back to her with the information from Tam about how to make this shepherd thing actually work, and then Schmidt and Makakasa would return to their universe, and with Cloverfield Station. But Jensen doesn't think that there's enough time for her Earth to build a new version of the Shepherd, and so takes the gun that Volkov made and just goes around shooting people.
Yeah, although this is another problem, is that, yeah, she quite, when she's confronted, she quite reasonably makes the point, because our heroine asks of her, are you really going to kill these people? She says, am I going to kill 3 people to save the entirety of human civilization in my whole dimension? Yeah, I'm going to do that. And that is perfectly reasonable. This is not, and character ends up a couple minutes later dying pretty brutally, which, like, that was the death merited by a much more villainous antagonist than this person, whose motivations were, from their perspective, entirely justified and righteous.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think... Again, going back to Marvel, there was a plot line where the different dimensions were intersecting with each other, funnily enough, and in order to save their dimension, they had to destroy the Earth on the other dimension. And let's just say there was a whole bunch of comics about, well, I mean, could you destroy an entirely populated Earth in order to save your own Earth?
Yeah, and that is the more dilemma that this movie raises, and then it is answered by, they'll probably be fine.
Yeah.
That is Hamilton's response. Is, I don't know, they'll probably work it out. I'm gonna save my Earth.
Like, if they had run with that for this whole last act, which kind of didn't even exist, it would probably be as interesting philosophically as some of the questions that were raised by 10 Cloverfield Lane. But this movie, they basically just send the other Earth an email with the information on how to make the Shepherd work, and then they're just like, yeah, they'll be fine. But Jensen chases Hamilton around the space station with a gun, and then Hamilton is able to get it, and she just shoots out the window, and Jensen is thrown into outer space, and Hamilton manages to save herself, and then again, with the email that she sends back to Jensen's Earth, she sends another email to herself about how, don't steal energy from the government because you're gonna fuck it up and kill your kids. No, and they literally just turn on the Shepherd, and it works perfectly.
Yeah!
They just wind it back in their home dimension, and it's suddenly creating all of this free energy for them.
Yeah, and it seems like the setup for, this is where it seems like it's the Scream moment, that it seems like we've triumphed, something else is gonna go wrong. And it doesn't. The thing that goes wrong is the stinger. The thing that goes wrong is the sequel bait, not the actual rest of the movie.
Yeah, while all this...
The ends and everything is peachy keen.
Yeah, while all this is going on, this is not even a subplot, this is like a subplot. But Hamilton's husband is back on Earth, and there's a big explosion, and people are talking about how there's something as horrible is going on, everything's getting destroyed. He is a doctor, so he's trying to get to the hospital, and he sees a big shadow moving, which that pissed me off to no end.
I thought that wasn't too overdone. I thought that was okay.
It annoyed me, but what I thought was happening was that, they had made this big point about the fact that the Shepherd was going to crack space and time. And so I thought I was looking at was, it was like a shadow image from another universe, that what he was seeing was the attack in 2008 from the original Cloverfield, but seeing it hazily through a different universe. And he winds up finding a girl who's screaming for no goddamn reason, and the girl's from Pennsylvania. And the first time I watched it, I thought what had happened was that she was from the Pennsylvania on the other Earth in the other dimension, and that she'd gotten shifted through the dimensions to London in the main Earth. But then my coworker pointed out, she's like, no, she was staying with her uncle. And like I rewatched it, I'm like, oh yeah, no, she's literally just staying with her uncle, and that's why she's an American who's living in England for some reason. And then I was very, very disappointed because I thought that was actually kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's a decent reason to be disappointed. I'm not as savvy a viewer as you, so none of that even occurred to me.
But he takes this girl to a bunker for a nice direct reference to 10 Cloverfield Lane, and he finds out that the Cloverfield station has reappeared. He's been told it's been missing, but they had just lost contact with it as opposed to it being destroyed. And he gets told that they are coming back down to Earth, and he freaks out. Oh my god, you can't do that. You know what the world is like now. No, fire bad, tree good.
The sun is a deadly laser.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the most intense piece of acting in the whole movie.
Yeah.
Like, people have been like confronting the fact that they live in an alternate reality where their kids haven't been killed by them yet, but they can't go and see them. And like all kinds of intense shit has happened throughout this movie. And then the most passionate, the most intense piece of acting is, "Don't bring my wife back to my home planet! Don't do it!"
Yep, Hamilton and Schmidt hop into a space capsule, fire themselves at Earth, and as they're falling, dun 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 dun, the Cloverfield monster, the original Cloverfield monster, pops out of the clouds.
Yeah!
Smash cut to the credits.
And I don't even know any. By that point, I'd lost enough brain cells that I was like, "Whoa, it's the giant monster from before." Like, that was probably a really shitty way to end the movie, but I just so didn't care. At that point, I was like, I'm not gonna start like picking this movie apart now. That would make me the chump.
So, how are you feeling about 10 Cloverfield Lane? Or not 10 Cloverfield. How are you feeling about the Cloverfield Paradox?
It's the most paradoxical. I don't know. Again, like I'll probably have to stew on it a little bit more, because my views on this movie in an objective sense hinge entirely upon whether it intended to be entertaining for me in the way that it was, which I think it did. Because you would have to really, really lack self-awareness if you thought that you were making, if you thought that you were making 2001 or fucking Solaris or something, and you made this movie. That's, there are a lot of checks and balances in the Hollywood system that prevent you from doing that by and large, which, people like Tommy Wiseau and Neil Breen don't have. So, my initial response to this movie was that this movie was exactly as goofy as it was supposed to be, which again fits somewhat with this franchise, because this franchise has always, to one extent or another, had kind of a dark sense of humor. It's never been as overtly goofy as in this movie, but both of the other two movies, especially the first one, did have a sense of humor, and they both were somewhat pulpy. And again, this is just this, it's a shame that there already is a movie called Pulp Fiction, because this movie, it is just a kind of glorious explosion of that aesthetic in the way that like, in the way that like Sky Captain is, or something like that. And so if that's what it was intended to be, which again, I think it's what it was, then I think that I would have to give a sincerely positive review to this movie, in the same way that I gave a sincerely positive review to Psycho Beach Party, which is also a stupid and batshit crazy movie, but that's what it was trying to be for the sake of entertainment. And I think that's what this movie did, and if that is what it did, then to do that for entertainment value, it succeeded, because I was entertained as hell watching this movie. That question is probably going to plague me for a while, and there might be some testimonials from some of the people involved that come out that make me shift one way or the other. But I remember one of the wisest things that my dad ever told me when we were talking about movies. He was a big cinema buff, as he said, that as he got older, he felt that it was increasingly less and less useful to divide things up into good or bad, or great and not so great, or kind of bad and appalling, and just that kind of scale of quality, that he felt that it was more useful to divide things up into boring and not boring. And this movie is not going to win any awards. It better not win any awards. If it does, that will annoy me, because that defeats the purpose. But it is not boring. It is not a boring movie, and I have not seen a movie like it in a while. And I'm kind of happy that it was made. And I think that's probably the nicest thing that I, or maybe anyone, is going to say about this movie.
I always say that we judge movies, judge all media on not a linear axis, but rather we use an XY axis, where we judge them based on quality, that you have bad and you have go running to good, but you also have a Y axis of entertaining and boring. And so when you have those sort of pretentious movies that everyone hates, but are supposed to be very, very good, are obviously very high on the quality side of things, but are very low on the entertaining side of things. Whereas something like, Die Hard maybe, might not be necessarily very high on the quality side of things, but very high on the entertaining side of things. And so if something's very entertaining but has really low quality, we call it camp. If something is low on both entertainment and quality, then it's just like horrible garbage, like the Transformers movies.
I was literally about to say that.
Yeah, whereas
Great minds.
Like, I think Get Out would qualify as something that is highly entertaining and yet also impeccably high quality.
Yeah. Or, I don't know, my go-to is always Fury Road for recent years.
But this is my first reaction to it, which I posted on the internet, was that this potentially could be a camp classic.
Yeah, I think absolutely.
Because there are lots of things that are entertaining about it, but it's just kind of ridiculous.
Kinda.
And
understatement of the year.
Like I said earlier in the podcast, I don't think that there was a version of the script that was good. I know it's gone through a lot of different versions of the script and been rewritten by a lot of people, including the version that was meant to intimately tied in with the Cloverfield franchise. But I think that there were interesting ideas and stuff that could have been made into a really good movie. I don't know if they could have made a good movie as good as 10 Cloverfield Lane, but they could certainly have done better than they actually wound up with.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with that. I think that you could have made a sincerely good movie out of this. Although, again, since if you're going to make a straight sincere movie, sort of in this vein, we would be comparing it to 10 Cloverfield Lane, since that was the last movie that came out, and I think there's no way that it would have measured up in that regard. So, again, in a way, I kind of admire them for going so hard in a different direction. That they're, okay, we're not going to, for the time being, especially if they wanted to do a movie like this. If you're going to have your space adventure movie, unless you're going all in and you really do intend to make 2001 or Solaris or some shit, then if you are taking it seriously, 10 Cloverfield Lane set the bar so high that I feel like we would be sitting here saying, if they managed to make a somewhat good movie out of that, then we would be sitting here saying, hey, it's a somewhat good movie, but not as good as 10 Cloverfield Lane. And I don't think we would have had nearly as much to talk about if this movie were good in the traditional sense.
All right, well, let's talk about Cloverfield as a franchise, because the next Cloverfield movie is coming out at the end of the year, Overlord. I don't think that there's been anything said about whether or not it's going to be an actual theatrical release, or if it is also going to wind up on Netflix. But what are your thoughts on Cloverfield as a franchise?
I would welcome it. I mean, it is sort of just barely a franchise at this point. It's a series of almost entirely unconnected movies that have certain thematic and tonal similarities, are maybe set in the same, let's say, multiverse, and has some sort of Easter eggs and stingers that stitch it together a little bit. But they're three very different movies in kind of all regards, which, I think I said this in our last episode, I kind of really like about it, because it is not predictable. People give the Marvel movies, which are, is sort of the most popular franchise in the world right now, a lot of shit for being kind of samey. And I'm a fan of the MCU, but I would tend to agree. They're very formulaic, very similar in tone. Even the ones that kind of stray out of it, like, okay, Winter Soldier is more of a straight political thriller, Guardians of the Galaxy is more of a comedy, but they don't break the mold too much. Whereas, these movies are all over the place. And I do really like that, because, okay, so there's another movie coming out this year, which we don't have any information about. I have no fucking idea what that movie's gonna be. What are we gonna say is, oh, well, it's just another Cloverfield movie. It's like, what does that even mean? So I really like that there is a franchise that is an active thing in the Hollywood world right now, that I just have no idea what the next thing I'm gonna get from it is. And in terms of the quality of the movies, they've been consistently not boring. Again, I would find it hard to say they've been consistently great. I think the only traditionally great movie that it's produced is 10 Cloverfield Lane. I think the first movie is really good movie with some glaring flaws. This movie is nothing but glaring flaws, which makes it kind of a good movie. And it has been a consistently really, really entertaining and really unpredictable franchise, and I still have no idea what it's playing at. I don't know if it's gonna, I feel like, again, it seems like it's teasing towards this larger whole that it's building towards, but I think that it might be trolling me by doing that. There might never be a Cloverfield Avengers, in which I would be in all support of, just to keep getting these really fun, all in their own way, kind of cuckoo movies, adding up to a really fun and pretty cuckoo franchise. So I'm very, very glad that the Cloverfield franchise is a thing, and I hope there is substantially more of it for me to consume.
Yeah, I mean, this is an anthology franchise, which both Friday the 13th and Halloween were supposed to be anthology franchises, that every movie was supposed to be different, but all tied back to the same ideas and themes as the original. But what happened with them, and what always happens with anything that is trying to be an anthology, is that if the first one's a success, then they want to replicate what made that so successful. And if it isn't a success, then there's no point in making sequels. But Cloverfield is definitely trying to do something the movies are only connected by these sorts of existential questions about humans confronting the unknown, a general sense of post-September 11thism, and a universe where
there be monsters.
Yeah, and I really like that that is what it is. That Overlord might not tie in any way to any of these other three movies. And I think that...
I just looked it up on Wikipedia. Apparently, it's about magic knots.
Well, I mean, if we're throwing magic in, then...
Or something. It said that it's two paratroopers in Normandy in 1944 who find out that the Nazis are using supernatural forces against them. I'm down.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I think possibly the thing that worked the least for me was the fact that the Cloverfield Paradox threw in the monsters from Cloverfield, rather than just having them be this idea that, well, what happened in the Cloverfield Paradox is creating the conditions for the original Cloverfield and the 10 Cloverfield Lane. Like, I really like the idea that Cloverfield and 10 Cloverfield Lane and the Cloverfield Paradox all don't even take place in the same universe. That they're all just different universes that were affected by this experiment gone wrong, even if it is sort of ridiculous nonsense.
Yeah, I could buy into that. Again, I don't even want to speculate about the Cloverfield lore at this point, just because there isn't any. And if they're gonna tell me more as the franchise goes on, then I'll go along for that. But until they do, like, I'm not particularly interested in piecing together a theory about how this is all gonna tie together, because that seems, again, to sort of run contrary to the point of how the franchise is set up, is that they're deliberately unconnected in most regards, and they might be building towards something more connected, and if they do, then I'll go along with that, and if not, then I'll take whatever they give me.
Alright, so that is the Cloverfield Paradox. And Cloverfield as a whole, we are closing the book for a couple of months.
Maybe. The next one might come out next week.
Yeah, let's just say that this one messed up our schedule. That was immaculately made by me, an attempt to get everything humanly possible done. For our couple of listeners, anyone that cares, I felt that we were very, very rushed with our Insidious podcasts, so I went through the year and picked out what all the franchises were going to be so that we could hurry up and cover them, which were The Strangers, Cloverfield, The Purge, and The Conjuring movies. And so I made a very extensive schedule where you could fit in everything that needed to be fit in order to get everything done and ready for when those movies dropped. And then, of course, the Cloverfield Paradox fucked me over. Luckily, we had already recorded the original Cloverfield movie, and we had actually scheduled to do 10 Cloverfield Lane the very next week, but we had to drop our Valentine's Day special and our coverage of Winchester. Poor Helen Mirren. Do you think Helen Mirren's sad in her soul about the fact that we did not talk about her and her performance in Winchester?
Helen Mirren's fine. Helen Mirren is doing just fine, I'm pretty sure. And again, also, nobody saw Winchester.
I saw Winchester, and I can tell you that there were ghosts that caused earthquakes in it. You could also
Maybe that's what Overlord will be about. Maybe Winchester secretly is a Cloverfield movie.
Yeah. You can also shoot and kill ghosts in Winchester. Yeah, I felt it was okay to dump our Valentine's Day special in Winchester, but I was not happy about it. But yeah, so
apologize to us, J.J. Abrams.
Exactly.
You made Peter cry.
For many, many nights. So who knows? Maybe the next Cloverfield movie will drop tomorrow. And if it does, we will cover it and be happy about it. So let's get to our final segment, Best Death. So who had the best death in this movie?
Oh, that's like asking me to choose between my own children. I guess.
Would you say it's like asking you to choose between a dimension where you already exist and you have children, or a dimension where your children are dead?
Sure. Yeah, I guess Death by Ice, Death by Space Ice is pretty hard to beat. So I'll go with Tam.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go with Tam too.
But there's Death by Worms. There's Death by metal octopus thing, magnets, fucking magnets. How do they work?
Death by magnets.
Yeah, the entire most of this movie is just a sequence of people dying in extraordinary and beautiful ways in space. In space.
Yeah, but I think Tam's ice death is so good. So good.
It's different. I've not seen Death by Space Ice before.
Alright, so thank you for listening. I've been Peter.
I continue to be Tim.
Have a great night. Bye-bye. Avoid those giant monsters.
And the real monsters, which are landmines. So long.